The gavel slam echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Guilty. The word hung in the air, stealing my breath. Just yesterday, I'd been Marcus Taylor, 26, community college student with plans. Now, I was a murderer in the eyes of 12 strangers who deliberated for just 2 hours. My mother's wail pierced the silence. I couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see my future dissolving in her tears. 25 years to life, the judge announced, not even looking at me. The cuffs bit into my wrists as the officer yanked me toward the door. Reality fractured around me. This couldn't be happening. I didn't kill anyone. I'd never even met Alicia Grant. But somehow her blood was on my jacket, my face was on a grainy security camera, and my life was over. What I didn't know then was that my conviction had been decided long before I ever set foot in that courtroom. 6 months earlier, life had finally started making sense. After years of stop-start progress, working night shifts while attending community college during the day, I'd finally earned my associate's degree in information technology. The small IT consulting firm where I'd been interning offered me a full-time position with benefits, the first real job I'd ever had. Mom threw me a barbecue in our small backyard, inviting everyone from church and the neighborhood. To Marcus, my Uncle Dion had toasted, holding up his lemonade. He'd been sober 3 years. First Taylor to graduate college, and proof that good things come to those who hustle. My girlfriend Shanice had been there too, her smile wide and proud. We'd been together since high school, stuck it out when most couples we knew had fallen apart. That night, after everyone left, she'd whispered that maybe it was time we started thinking about getting a place together, maybe even a ring. For once, the future looked solid enough to build dreams on. Our apartment complex wasn't in the best neighborhood, but it wasn't the worst either. Working class, mostly Black and Latino families who kept to themselves. I'd grown up there, knew which streets to avoid after dark, which store owners would watch you like a hawk and which would leave you be. The daily mental calculations became second nature. Keep receipts when shopping, no hoodies at night, hands visible when police cars passed. The routine indignities of being a young Black man in America that I barely registered anymore. You look more professional with your hair cut short, my new boss had mentioned during my first week. I'd grown out my hair for 2 years, but nodded and booked a barber appointment that weekend. Some battles weren't worth fighting. My desk at work was next to Heather's, the only other junior consultant. She'd graduated from State with a bachelor's in computer science, but we'd quickly bonded over our shared love of old-school video games and 90s hip-hop. Sometimes I caught her watching me with a curious expression when I spoke with clients, like she was surprised by something. "You've got a real knack for making the technical stuff sound simple," she told me once. "I get all awkward and jargony, but you make it sound easy." I didn't tell her that when you grow up code-switching between different worlds, you learn to translate pretty much anything. My routine back then was simple. Work from 8 to 5, dinner with Mom or Shanice, online gaming with my childhood friend Darius on Thursdays, and Sunday service at Greater Hope Baptist. I was saving for a used car, tired of the unpredictable bus schedule and the long walks home when I missed the last one. It was on one of those walks that I first saw the police activity at the corner store 3 blocks from my apartment. Yellow tape, patrol cars, officers questioning people outside. I kept my distance, just another neighborhood curiosity, until I heard a woman's voice. "Young girl," they're saying, "dead in the alley behind the shop. Awful business." I shook my head, made the sign of the cross like Mom taught me, and took the long way home. 2 weeks later, I wouldn't even remember seeing that scene. The weekend before everything changed, our firm landed a major contract with a local healthcare provider. The whole team went out for drinks to celebrate. I nursed a single beer. I didn't like drinking much and definitely couldn't risk a DUI or public intoxication charge. My supervisor Nathan was hammered, slinging his arm around my shoulders. "You know what, Marcus? You're different," he slurred. "Not like other... you know. You work hard, real smart too." I smiled tightly and thanked him, pretending not to understand what he meant by other. Heather caught my eye across the table, her face flushing with second-hand embarrassment. The next morning was Sunday. I debated skipping church. I was tired and had a presentation to prepare for Monday. But Mom would notice, and I didn't want to hear about it all week. So I threw on a button-down and slacks and headed out. On my way, I stopped at the corner store for a bottle of water. The owner, Mr. Patel, nodded at me from behind the counter. I'd been coming there since I was a kid, buying candy with pocket change. "How's the new job, Marcus?" he asked, ringing me up. "Good, Mr. Patel, really good." The security camera above the register blinked its red eye as I paid and left, tucking the receipt into my wallet out of habit. If I'd skipped church that morning, if I hadn't stopped for that water, if the camera hadn't captured my face at 9:47 a.m. on what would turn out to be the day Alicia Grant's body was discovered, maybe I'd still be a free man. Because what none of us knew was that while I was listening to Pastor Wallace preach about perseverance, detectives were already building a case around a grainy image of a black man in a blue shirt leaving that same corner store, just hours before someone would anonymously call in a tip about suspicious activity behind the building. The knock came at 6:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 sharp raps that jolted me from sleep. Mom answered before I could even get out of bed. By the time I made it to the living room, 2 detectives were already seated on our worn couch, Mom hovering nervously by the kitchen doorway. "Marcus Taylor?" The older detective stood, not offering his hand. "Detective Brennan," he said. His partner, Rodriguez, remained seated, eyes cataloguing our modest apartment. "Yes, sir?" I was instantly alert, that familiar caution activating in my body. Be polite, be respectful. Don't give them any reason. "We'd like to ask you some questions about your whereabouts on Sunday, March 15th. My mind raced. That was over a week ago. "I was at church, sir. Greater Hope Baptist. Every Sunday morning." Brennan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Before church." "I stopped at the corner store on Lexington, then went straight to service." "Mind coming down to the station, just to clear some things up?" It wasn't really a question. Mom's eyes widened with fear, but I gave her a reassuring nod. I had nothing to hide. The system worked if you cooperated, right? That's what they always said. "Can I change first?" I was still in sweatpants and a t-shirt. "Sure," Rodriguez spoke for the first time. "We'll wait." At the station, they put me in a small room with no windows. I waited for almost 2 hours before the detectives returned. They hadn't arrested me, they emphasized, just wanted to talk. I didn't need a lawyer. This would be quick if I cooperated. "Do you know Alicia Grant?" Brennan slid a photo across the table. "A young white woman with blonde hair and a bright smile." I shook my head. "No, sir. Never seen her before." "Really? Because she was found dead behind the corner store on Lexington, the same morning you were there." My stomach dropped. The police activity I'd seen weeks earlier, but no, that wasn't the same day. That was weeks ago. The police tape. I saw it walking home one night." Brennan and Rodriguez exchanged a look. "No, Marcus, Alicia was killed on the 15th, and you were one of the last people seen in that vicinity." What followed was hours of the same questions, asked slightly differently each time. Did I know Alicia? Had I ever met her? What was I really doing at the store? Why was I in that neighborhood? It didn't matter that I lived there. It didn't matter that I had a receipt time-stamped and paid with my debit card. It didn't matter that I went to church afterward, where dozens of people saw me. "You had time," Brennan insisted. "Plenty of time to go behind the store, assault Alicia, and still make it to church to establish your alibi." When they finally let me go at 8 p.m., I was exhausted and confused, but still believing this was just a mistake that would sort itself out. 3 days later, they came for me at work, in front of everyone. My boss, Heather, clients in the lobby, handcuffs, Miranda rights, the works. A witness had come forward, they said. Someone who saw a man matching my description, arguing with Alicia behind the store. They'd found fibers matching my blue button-down on her body. "But that's impossible," I kept saying. "I never met her. I never went behind the store." My court-appointed attorney, Mr. Garner, had bloodshot eyes and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. His office smelled like old coffee and cheaper aftershave. He had 3 other cases in court that week, he explained. He'd do his best. "They're saying they found your DNA at the scene," he told me during our second meeting. "That's not possible. Blood evidence on a jacket matching yours was recovered from a dumpster 2 blocks away." "That's not my jacket. I didn't throw anything away." He sighed, rubbing his temples. They have a witness, Marcus. She's ID'd you from a photo lineup. She's wrong, or lying. I don't know this Alicia person. The local news ran my mugshot next to Alicia's smiling graduation photo. Community college student charged in brutal slaying of local nurse, the headline read. They mentioned her volunteer work, her plans to join Doctors Without Borders. About me, they noted a juvenile record, a misdemeanor trespassing charge from when I was 15, hanging out in an abandoned building with friends. Known to police, they called me. Mom put up our apartment as collateral for bail, but the judge denied it. Flight risk, he said, barely looking at me. I spent the next 3 months in county jail, waiting for trial. Shanice visited the first week, crying behind the plexiglass. I know you didn't do this, she whispered, but her visits became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Her mother never liked me anyway, probably convinced her I was guilty. The evidence kept mounting, all circumstantial, but building a compelling narrative. The security footage showing me at the store but never behind it. A witness who saw a young black male in a blue shirt arguing with Alicia, though she'd initially described him as tall when I'm 5'8". The blood evidence on a blue button-down similar to mine, though they never found the actual murder weapon. My lack of a solid alibi for the 45-minute window between the store and church. When the DNA results came back, Mr. Garner looked defeated. It's a partial match, Marcus. They're saying the blood on the jacket is likely yours, mixed with Alicia's. That's impossible. Test me again. The DA is offering a deal. 15 years if you plead guilty to second-degree murder. Say it was a robbery gone wrong. I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do. In discovery, we learned that the detective's initial report described the suspect as African-American male, approximately 6 feet tall, athletic build. I'm 5'8" and slim. When I pointed this out, Garner sighed. Eyewitness descriptions are often inconsistent. They'll say the witness was in shock. I also learned that police had initially questioned Alicia's ex-boyfriend, a white pre-med student named Ryan Schaefer, who had a documented history of jealous behavior. They'd quickly ruled him out when he provided an alibi, studying with friends at the university library. No one verified it beyond calling one of those friends. The day before jury selection, Detective Rodriguez approached me in the holding cell. Look, we know you did it. The evidence says you did it. Make it easier on yourself and everyone. Take the deal. When I maintained my innocence, something hardened in his eyes. Have it your way. The jury that would decide my fate included 11 white members and 1 elderly Asian man, not a single black person. As I watched them file in, I noticed one woman glancing at me and then quickly looking away, fear in her eyes. It was then I realized what Detective Rodriguez's look had meant. The system wasn't interested in the truth. It had found its perfect suspect, a young black man with just enough evidence to make a convincing case, and nothing I said or did was going to change the ending they'd already written. The courtroom felt impossibly large and suffocatingly small at the same time. I sat beside Mr. Garner in a borrowed suit that hung loose on my frame. 3 months in county jail had stripped 15 pounds off my already lean build. Behind the prosecutor's table, Assistant District Attorney Melissa Jenkins arranged her files with military precision. According to Garner, she had a 97% conviction rate and was rumored to be eyeing a run for DA next year. All rise for the Honorable Judge Richard Harmon. The judge barely acknowledged me as he took his seat. White-haired and stern-faced, he'd been on the bench for over 20 years. Garner had warned me that Judge Harmon was known for harsh sentences, particularly in violent crime cases. The jury watched me throughout the proceedings. I tried to meet their eyes, to project the innocence I felt, but most looked away quickly. The elderly Asian man, Mr. Chen, a retired accountant, was the only one who seemed to actually study me with any curiosity rather than predetermined judgment. Jenkins' opening statement painted a chilling picture. A hard-working young nurse, brutally attacked and strangled behind a convenience store. A predator, me, who saw an opportunity and took it. The evidence will show that the defendant, Marcus Taylor, encountered Alicia Grant that Sunday morning, followed her behind the store, attacked her when she rejected his advances and left her to die alone on the cold pavement, Jenkins told the jury, her voice breaking at just the right moment. And then he went to church as if nothing had happened. Garner's opening was brief and disorganized. He promised to show reasonable doubt, emphasizing the circumstantial nature of the evidence, but his words lacked the emotional punch of Jenkins's narrative. I could see the jury had already begun to form their opinions. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over 5 days. The store owner, Mr. Patel, confirmed I'd been in his shop that morning, but couldn't say where I went afterward. Under cross-examination, he admitted he'd known me for years and never had any problems. The witness, Sarah Myers, a college student who lived in an apartment with a window facing the alley, identified me as the man she saw arguing with Alicia. On the stand, she seemed nervous, her eyes darting between me and the prosecutor. "Are you absolutely certain the man you saw that morning is the defendant?" Jenkins asked. "Yes," she said, though her voice wavered. "I'm pretty sure." Under cross-examination, Garner pointed out that in her initial statement, she described a man over 6 feet tall and couldn't identify any facial features because he had his back to her. "The police showed you a photo lineup, correct?" Garner asked. "Yes." "And did they tell you that their suspect was in that lineup?" "Objection," Jenkins interrupted. "Leading the witness." "Sustained," Judge Harmon ruled, giving Garner a warning look. The forensic evidence came next. A lab technician testified that blood found on a discarded blue button-down shirt matched both Alicia's blood type and, through partial DNA analysis, was highly likely to contain my DNA. "What percentage of certainty can you provide regarding this match?" Jenkins asked. "Based on the markers we were able to isolate, there's approximately an 85% likelihood that the secondary DNA belongs to the defendant." Garner objected that this didn't meet the standard for DNA evidence, which typically requires over 99% certainty. Judge Harmon overruled him, allowing the testimony to stand. The prosecution's case was built on coincidences and maybes, woven together into a story that, while full of holes, created a compelling narrative. I was at the store. Alicia was at the store. Someone matching a vague description of me was seen arguing with her, and a shirt similar to mine with blood that might be mine was found near the scene. None of it was solid proof, but together it created the illusion of certainty. On the 4th day, Jenkins called Detective Brennan to the stand. "Detective, in your professional opinion, based on the evidence collected, do you believe the defendant is responsible for Alicia Grant's murder?" "Objection!" Garner jumped up. "Calls for speculation." "I'll rephrase," Jenkins smiled. "Detective Brennan, what led your investigation to focus on the defendant?" Brennan detailed the mounting evidence against me, including the security footage, witness identification, and blood evidence. What he didn't mention was that police had stopped investigating other suspects, including Alicia's ex-boyfriend, once they focused on me. On the 5th day, Garner presented our defense. Without resources for expert witnesses or a thorough independent investigation, he could only try to poke holes in the prosecution's case. I took the stand in my own defense against Garner's advice. I had to tell my story. "I never met Alicia Grant," I testified, my voice steady despite my nerves. "I never went behind that store. I went from the store directly to church, where dozens of people saw me." Jenkins' cross-examination was brutal. "If you're innocent, Mr. Taylor, how do you explain your DNA on the shirt found near the crime scene?" "That's not my shirt, and the technician said it was only a partial match." "So it's all just a coincidence? The timing, the location, the witness, the evidence?" "Yes, ma'am, a terrible coincidence." She smiled coldly. "And I suppose it's also a coincidence that no one at your church can specifically remember seeing you arrive that morning." Pastor Wallace had testified that while I regularly attended services, he couldn't swear to exactly what time I arrived that specific Sunday. No one could, not with certainty. In closing arguments, Jenkins spoke directly to the jury's emotions, showing Alicia's smiling photo one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, Alicia Grant was a light in this community, a healer, a daughter and sister who will never fulfill her dreams because the defendant decided to take her life. The evidence points clearly to his guilt. Don't let him walk free to hurt someone else. Garner emphasized reasonable doubt, but his arguments felt technical and cold compared to Jenkins' emotional appeal. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours before returning with a verdict. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Marcus Taylor, guilty. The word slammed into me like a physical blow. Behind me, my mother collapsed into tears. The judge set sentencing for the following week, and I was led back to my cell in a daze. 1 week later, I stood before Judge Harmon again, numb as he delivered the sentence that would erase my future. Marcus Taylor, you have been found guilty of the murder of Alicia Grant. This court sentences you to 25 years to life in the state penitentiary. 3 months earlier, I had been celebrating my associate's degree and first real job. Now I was inmate number 479632, another young black man swallowed by a system that never really saw me as anything else. The bus ride to the state penitentiary lasted 4 hours, but it might as well have been a journey to another planet. Chained at the wrists and ankles, I watched through the wire-covered window as city blocks gave way to suburbs, then to open country, freedom passing by at 65 miles per hour. Processing was a blur of indignities: strip search, delousing shower, prison uniform, ID card, hurried medical exam. Name? Age? Any medical conditions? No one looked me in the eye. I wasn't Marcus anymore, just another body to process, another statistic. First time in. The intake officer didn't wait for my answer. You'll be in D block. Keep to yourself, find your people quick, and don't catch the CO's attention. My people, I soon learned, wasn't a choice but a requirement. Prison was segregated, not by official policy, but by unwritten rules enforced by the inmates themselves. Black with black, white with white, Latino with Latino, Asian with Asian. Crossing these lines meant trouble. My first night, I lay awake on the thin mattress listening to the cacophony of prison sounds. Coughs, snores, occasional shouts, the constant metallic clangs of doors and gates. My cellmate Andre had been inside for 12 years on an armed robbery charge. You guilty? He asked bluntly as lights went out. No. He laughed without humor. Neither is anybody else in here to hear them tell it. But over the next few weeks, as I told my story, Andre grew quieter, more thoughtful. Maybe you really ain't, he said one day. System's rigged anyway, especially for brothers like us. The daily routine crushed the spirit by design. 5 a.m. wake-up, breakfast at 5:30, work assignment from 7 to 4, I was assigned to the laundry, dinner at 5, lockdown by 9. Every day the same, with only the prison yard for a change of scenery, the wage, 32 cents an hour. A 15-minute phone call home cost nearly a full day's pay. Mom visited every other weekend, taking 3 buses to make the trip. Each time she looked a little older, a little more worn down, but her faith never wavered. We're going to fight this, baby, she'd say, pressing her hand against the plexiglass. God knows the truth. Shanice never visited, neither did anyone from work. Heather sent one letter saying she was sorry about what happened, that some people at the office didn't believe I did it. I never heard from her again. 6 months in, a fight broke out in the yard between rival prison gangs. I wasn't involved, but when guards broke it up, I was swept up with others nearby. 2 weeks in solitary, administrative segregation they called it. A 6x9 concrete box with no windows, no books. Nothing but my thoughts and the occasional tray of unidentifiable food slid through a slot in the door. By day 3, I was talking to myself. By day 7, I was seeing shadows move on the walls. By day 14, a part of my mind had detached, floating somewhere above my body, watching myself slowly unravel. When they finally released me back to general population, something had shifted inside me. I could no longer passively accept what had happened. I had to fight or I'd lose myself entirely. I started spending every available moment in the prison library. I learned about appeals processes, habeas corpus petitions, evidentiary standards. I wrote to law schools with innocence projects, to journalists who covered wrongful convictions, to anyone who might listen. Most never responded. Those that did sent form letters explaining they had too many cases, too few resources, and my case lacked the clear-cut DNA evidence or recanted testimony that made for winnable appeals. Andre watched my efforts with a mixture of pity and respect. "System ain't designed to admit it made a mistake, young blood," he told me. "But I respect the fight." I found unlikely allies. Jarvis, the elderly inmate who ran the library, started setting aside legal texts he thought might help me. Officer Diaz, one of the few guards who treated inmates like humans, occasionally brought me newspaper clippings about similar cases or legal reforms. The breakthrough came in my third year. A new inmate arrived, a wiry white guy named Mitch, who'd been convicted of check fraud. He'd worked as a paralegal before his conviction and took an interest in my case. "The blood evidence is the weakest link," he said after reviewing my trial transcripts. "Partial DNA match? That's bullshit science they dressed up for the jury." With Mitch's help, I drafted a more focused appeal, challenging the forensic evidence and the witness identification. We sent it to the Innocence Project, the ACLU, and a law professor at State University known for taking on wrongful conviction cases. Months passed with no response. Meanwhile, life inside continued its grinding routine. I lost my laundry assignment after a new supervisor took a dislike to me, sending me instead to the kitchen with its 16-hour shifts and dangerous equipment. Mum's visits became less frequent as her health declined, diabetes, high blood pressure, the accumulated stress of watching her only son waste away in prison. In my fourth year, I received a letter from Emily Winters, a law student working with Professor James Montgomery at State University's Criminal Justice Clinic. "We've reviewed your case and believe there may be grounds for appeal based on problems with the forensic evidence presented at your trial. While we can't make any promises, we would like to meet with you to discuss potentially representing you." Hope, that dangerous emotion I'd tried to keep buried, flared to life. The meeting took place in the prison's attorney room. Professor Montgomery was a stern-faced black man in his 60s, with graying temples and penetrating eyes. Emily was a white woman in her 20s, earnest and prepared with a legal pad full of notes. "The partial DNA match they presented at your trial wouldn't meet today's standards for admissibility," Montgomery explained. "Newer testing methods could potentially exclude you entirely." "There's also the witness identification," Emily added. "Recent Supreme Court rulings have emphasized the unreliability of cross-racial identifications, especially when suggestive lineup procedures were used. For the first time in 4 years, someone with actual power in the legal system was looking at the holes in my conviction." "It won't be quick," Montgomery warned, "and success isn't guaranteed. The courts resist overturning convictions, especially when the defendant is—" He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. "Especially when the defendant is a young black man, especially when admitting a mistake would mean admitting systemic bias." As they prepared to leave, I asked the question that had haunted me for years. If I didn't kill Alicia, why hasn't anyone looked for who did? Montgomery's expression softened slightly. "That's part of what we'll be investigating. Justice isn't just getting you out, it's finding the truth." The investigation moved at a glacial pace. Court filings, motions, requests for evidence preservation and retesting. Every step faced opposition from the DA's office, now led by Melissa Jenkins herself, who fought to maintain my conviction like her professional reputation depended on it, which, in a way, it did. In my 5th year, an unexpected letter arrived. The return address made my hands shake. Sarah Myers, the witness who had identified me at trial. "I've been seeing a therapist," she wrote, "working through some things, including the guilt I've carried about your case. The truth is, I never really saw the man's face that morning. The police showed me your photo repeatedly before the lineup, telling me you were their main suspect. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, helping get justice for that poor girl. But I've realized I may have helped convict an innocent man instead. I don't know if this letter helps your case, but I needed you to know." I read the letter 10 times, then called Professor Montgomery. 2 weeks later, the police case file arrived at Montgomery's office through a court order, including the original witness statements and early investigative reports that hadn't been turned over to my original defense. "They suppressed exculpatory evidence," Montgomery told me during his next visit, barely containing his anger. There was another witness who reported seeing a white male leaving the scene around the time of the murder. That witness was never called to testify, and their statement wasn't provided to your attorney. The pieces were finally coming together, the partial DNA results that wouldn't hold up under modern standards, the witness who admitted to being influenced by police, the suppressed evidence of another potential suspect. We're filing for a new trial based on Brady violations and ineffective assistance of counsel, Montgomery said, and we're demanding new DNA testing using current technology. For the first time in 5 years, the impossible began to seem possible. I might get a chance to prove my innocence, to reclaim my name, to go home. That night, as I lay on my bunk, staring at the concrete ceiling, a letter slid under my cell door. No name, no return address. Inside was a faded photo of Alicia Grant, with a man whose arm was around her shoulders. On the back, written in cramped handwriting, "Ask about Ryan Schaefer's campus security job and where he really was that morning. The library alibi is a lie." The state opposes this motion for a new trial on all grounds, District Attorney Jenkins declared, standing ramrod straight before Judge Esther Ramirez. 6 years had passed since my conviction, and this hearing represented my best, perhaps only, chance at freedom. The defendant was convicted by a jury of his peers based on substantial evidence. This is nothing more than a desperate attempt to overturn a just verdict. Professor Montgomery rose from beside me, his voice steady but forceful. "Your Honor, we have presented clear evidence of Brady violations, ineffective counsel, and new scientific developments that call into question the forensic evidence used to convict Mr. Taylor. Supreme Court precedent is clear in such cases." We were back in court after months of legal wrangling. The anonymous tip about Ryan Schaefer had led Montgomery's team down a revealing path. Schaefer had indeed worked campus security part-time during college. His shift logs showed he was scheduled to work the morning of Alicia's murder, but had called in sick. His library alibi, provided by a fraternity brother, had never been verified by checking card swipe records or security footage. More importantly, Montgomery's team had uncovered disturbing coincidences. Schaefer had dated Alicia for 8 months before she broke up with him 3 weeks before her death. Campus police records showed a complaint filed by Alicia's roommate about Schaefer's concerning behavior following the breakup, including showing up unannounced at Alicia's workplace. None of this had been disclosed to my original defense attorney. Judge Ramirez was new to the bench, appointed 2 years after my conviction. She studied both attorneys over her reading glasses, then looked directly at me, something Judge Harmon had rarely done. "I've reviewed the briefs extensively," she said. "I'm particularly troubled by the Brady violations and the questions surrounding the forensic evidence. I'm granting the motion for new DNA testing using current methodologies. We'll reconvene when those results are available." D.A. Jenkins' face tightened, but she nodded curtly. As I was led back to the holding cell, Montgomery gave me a cautious smile. "First hurdle cleared," he murmured. The new DNA testing took months, a nerve-wracking wait as I oscillated between hope and crushing doubt. The prison grapevine had spread word of my potential exoneration, changing how both inmates and guards treated me. Some offered quiet support. Others suggested I'd made some kind of deal or had connections on the outside. "Keep your head down," Andre advised. He'd been granted parole after serving 15 years, but still wrote to me regularly. "You're closer than ever. Don't let anything derail you now." When the results finally came back, Montgomery and Emily visited immediately, barely containing their excitement. "The DNA on the shirt excluded you completely," Emily explained, spreading the report on the table. Modern testing methods identified 2 distinct DNA profiles, Alicia's and another male's that is definitively not yours. "Whose is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "They ran it through CODIS but got no hits," Montgomery said. "But we've petitioned for a sample from Ryan Schaefer for comparison." D.A. Jenkins fought the request vigorously, arguing that Schaefer wasn't on trial and had never been charged. But Judge Ramirez, citing the extraordinary circumstances and interest of justice, granted the motion. Schaefer, now a medical resident in another state, was compelled to provide a DNA sample. The results were conclusive. The male DNA on the shirt matched him. Even with this evidence, the path to exoneration remained arduous. The system that had so swiftly convicted me now moved at a glacial pace to acknowledge its error. Jenkins refused to concede, arguing that the DNA evidence merely suggested Schaefer had contact with Alicia before her death, not that he killed her. The original conviction stands on other evidence, she maintained in court filings. The witness identification, the defendant's presence near the scene, the timing. But the foundation was crumbling. Sarah Myers, the witness, had signed an affidavit recanting her identification. Montgomery's team uncovered that the original forensic technician who testified had been disciplined in other cases for overstating conclusions. And most damningly, Ryan Schaefer's alibi witness admitted under pressure that he had lied at Schaefer's request. 7 years into my sentence, I returned to court for what would be my final hearing. The courtroom was packed, not just with my family and supporters, but with media, law students, and representatives from innocence projects across the state. My story had begun to attract attention beyond just another wrongful conviction case. It highlighted the systemic problems that led to my imprisonment: rush to judgment, racial bias in witness identification, prosecutorial misconduct, inadequate defense resources. Judge Ramirez entered and called the court to order. Her expression gave nothing away as she reviewed the documents before her. After careful consideration of the new evidence presented, including the DNA exclusion of the defendant, the recanted witness testimony, and the serious Brady violations by the prosecution, this court finds that Mr. Taylor's conviction cannot stand. The motion for a new trial is granted. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Montgomery squeezed my shoulder, but we both knew this wasn't the end. Jenkins could still retry me. The judge continued. Furthermore, given the overwhelming evidence pointing to another suspect and the clear misconduct that led to this wrongful conviction, this court dismisses all charges against Marcus Taylor with prejudice. She looked directly at me. Mr. Taylor, you are free to go. The bailiff will process your release immediately. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 7 years, 2,563 days, gone in a single sentence. As I was led out, I caught a glimpse of Jenkins, her face flushed with anger or embarrassment. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something I hadn't expected: uncertainty. Perhaps for the first time, she was confronting the reality that she'd built her career on sending an innocent man to prison. The processing for release took nearly as long as my initial intake. Paperwork, more paperwork, personal effects returned. My watch had stopped working years ago. Civilian clothes provided. They didn't fit. Release instructions, referrals to re-entry services. Finally, I walked through the steel doors and into the sunlight. Mom was waiting, older and frailer than I remembered, leaning on a cane. Beside her stood Professor Montgomery, Emily, and a cluster of law students who had worked on my case. 7 years, 5 months, and 16 days, Montgomery said, checking his watch as he shook my hand. Far too long, but today justice finally prevailed. As cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, I held my mother tightly, feeling her tears soak my shoulder. Over her head, I saw a news van with a reporter doing a live broadcast. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Innocent man freed after 7 years. DNA evidence exonerates Marcus Taylor." That evening, as we drove away from the prison that had stolen my 20s, Montgomery informed me that Ryan Schaefer had been taken in for questioning. Based on the DNA evidence and the collapsed alibi, police were now investigating him for Alicia's murder 7 years after they should have. What happens now? I asked, watching the prison disappear in the rearview mirror. Now we fight for compensation, Montgomery said. Our state limits payments to exonerees to $50,000 per year of wrongful incarceration, capped at $750,000. It's inadequate, but it's something to rebuild with. And we keep fighting to prevent this from happening to others, Emily added. Your case could help change policies on witness identification procedures, forensic evidence standards, and prosecutorial accountability. I nodded, though the future still felt unreal, the ground beneath me unsteady. I was free, but freedom itself had become a foreign country while I was away. The world had continued without me for 7 years, and I would have to learn how to exist in it again. As darkness fell and lights flashed by on the highway, I made a silent promise to myself. This system that had so carelessly discarded my life would not define me. I had survived. Now I would reclaim everything that had been taken, my name, my future, and perhaps most importantly, my voice. Because if there was one thing I knew with absolute certainty, it was that I wasn't the only innocent person behind those walls. And their stories deserved to be heard too. The morning after my release, I woke up disoriented in Mom's spare bedroom, momentarily panicked by the absence of cell bars and the silence where prison sounds should be. For 7 years, I'd dreamed of this freedom. Now that I had it, I didn't know what to do with it. Simple things overwhelmed me. The grocery store with its endless choices paralyzed me for nearly an hour. Cell phones had evolved beyond recognition. Social media had transformed how people communicated. Old friends had gotten married, had children, built careers, lives that had moved forward while mine had frozen in amber. "It's normal to feel this way," counseled Dr. Patterson, a psychologist specializing in post-incarceration trauma. "You're experiencing a form of culture shock, compounded by PTSD from your prison experience." The symptoms manifested in ways I hadn't anticipated. I couldn't sleep on the soft mattress Mum had bought specially for my return. After years on a prison cot, it felt like I was drowning in comfort. I slept on the floor for months. Crowded spaces sent my heart racing. Sudden noises made me flinch violently. I struggled to make decisions. After years of having every minute dictated by prison schedules, choice itself became overwhelming. The practical challenges proved equally daunting. My driver's license had expired years ago. My credit history had evaporated. My college degree and brief professional experience were now ancient history in technological terms. When I applied for jobs and honestly filled out the criminal history section, I rarely got callbacks, despite the exonerated annotation. "We're not saying we don't believe you're innocent," one hiring manager told me awkwardly after I'd made it to an interview for an entry-level IT position. "It's just that there are other candidates without complications." Even with the innocent label, I remained tainted in the eyes of many. Some neighbors crossed the street when they saw me coming. Parents pulled their children closer. The story had made headlines briefly. "Man wrongfully imprisoned for 7 years released." But most people only remembered fragments: murder, prison, release. The details blurred and doubt lingered. "There's no smoke without fire," I overheard one of Mom's church friends murmuring. They must have had some reason to suspect him in the first place. Ryan Schaefer was eventually arrested and charged with Alicia's murder. Based on the DNA evidence and new witness testimony that emerged once investigators actually looked beyond me. He accepted a plea deal for second-degree murder, receiving a 15-year sentence. Less time than I would have served had I taken the plea originally offered to me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The compensation process dragged on for nearly 2 years. The state fought every step, arguing over technicalities, questioning whether I had contributed to my conviction by being at the store that morning. Finally, I received a settlement of $375,000, about $50,000 for each year lost, minus attorney's fees and taxes. The money helped pay off Mum's medical bills and secure a modest apartment, but it couldn't begin to compensate for the career I'd lost, the relationships destroyed, the psychological damage inflicted. Professor Montgomery introduced me to various advocacy groups for the wrongfully convicted. Through them, I met others who had walked the same path, men and women who had lost decades to wrongful imprisonment, who understood the unique pain of having your life stolen by a system that then reluctantly, begrudgingly, acknowledged its mistake without ever truly making amends. "The hardest part isn't the time inside," said Jerome Washington, who'd spent 22 years imprisoned for a rape he didn't commit. "It's what happens after. They take your life, then hand you back the pieces and say good luck putting it back together." I found some measure of purpose in sharing my story. I spoke at law schools, community forums, and criminal justice reform events. Each time I recounted my experience, the flimsy evidence, the biased investigation, the inadequate defense, I saw recognition dawn in the eyes of those who had never considered how easily the system could destroy an innocent person's life, particularly a black man's. Some of my former supporters proved fair-weather friends, Heather, my former co-worker who had written that single letter, attended one of my talks at the university. She approached afterward, visibly uncomfortable. "I always believed you were innocent," she said. "I should have done more." I just nodded. What could I say? That yes, she should have visited, written, advocated. That her belief in my innocence meant little when it remained safely private. The most difficult encounter came 3 years after my release. Detective Brennan, now retired, requested to meet through Montgomery. Against my better judgment, I agreed, meeting him at a coffee shop downtown. Age had softened his appearance, but not his certainty. "I'm not here to apologize," he said bluntly after we sat down. "I followed the evidence as I saw it." "Evidence you selected to see," I replied, keeping my voice level. "You decided I was guilty from the start." "That's not true." But he couldn't meet my eyes. "We had a witness. Forensics. Motive didn't make sense, I'll grant you that, but sometimes killings are random." "Nothing about what happened to me was random. You saw a young black man near the scene of a white woman's murder, and you stopped looking for any other possibility." He shook his head, but didn't contradict me. After an uncomfortable silence, he asked, "What do you want from me?" I considered the question carefully. Anger? I had plenty. Forgiveness? I wasn't there yet. Understanding? Perhaps. "I want you to recognize what you took from me," I finally said. 7 years. My career. Relationships. My mother's health declined, worrying about me. I missed funerals, weddings, births. I'll never get that back. And I want you to think about that the next time you see a young black man and make assumptions about who he is or what he's capable of. He nodded slowly, though I couldn't tell if my words had truly reached him. We parted without resolution. There could be none, really. 5 years after my release, I had rebuilt something resembling a life. I'd completed a coding boot camp, found work at a tech startup founded by a formerly incarcerated entrepreneur who believed in second chances. I'd moved to a new city where fewer people knew my history. I'd even started dating again, though I approached relationships with caution, always wondering when and how to explain my past. Mum died 3 years after my release. The diabetes and heart problems that had worsened during my incarceration finally overwhelming her. At her funeral, surrounded by her church friends who still regarded me with lingering suspicion, I thought about how the system had punished her, almost as severely as it had punished me. The hardest truth to accept was that my case wasn't exceptional. It was just one of the few where the truth eventually emerged. For every exoneration, countless others remained wrongfully imprisoned, their claims of innocence dismissed, their appeals denied, their lives forgotten by a society that preferred to believe the system worked. The criminal justice system never truly admitted its failure in my case. No one was disciplined for the Brady violations or the mishandled evidence. D.A. Jenkins went on to become a judge herself. Detective Brennan retired with full honors. The only accountability came through my civil suit, and even that money came from taxpayers, not from those responsible for my wrongful conviction. Sometimes people ask if I'm over it now, if I've moved on, found closure. The question itself reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what happens when the state takes your freedom unjustly. You don't recover from that loss. You rebuild around it. The crater remains, its edges softening perhaps, but always present. They took 7 years of my life that I can never reclaim. But they didn't take my humanity, my truth, or ultimately, my freedom. In speaking out, in helping others navigate the system that failed me, in working to change that system, I found purpose beyond survival. My name is Marcus Taylor. For 7 years, I was inmate number 479632, convicted of a murder I didn't commit. Today, I am an exoneree, an advocate, a survivor. My story isn't just about injustice. It's about truth that refuses to remain buried, no matter how long it takes to emerge.